Blades in the Dark has completely changed how I DM. Blades in the Dark puts the players in the roles of criminals operating in the underworld of a dark industrial city, walled off by lightning to keep the ghosts from overrunning it. And that lightning, as well as most things in the city, are powered by the blood of demons, harvested by these noble families who go whaling for these leviathans on massive iron ships. It's an incredibly evocative premise with an enticing setting, but it's the mechanics that were the true draw for me in bringing this game to my RPG group. Far more than Dungeons & Dragons, Blades in the Dark is a true collaborative storytelling game. D&D as a game and the products it develops are all about consuming content than about actually telling a story. Typically, D&D is about the players experiencing something that the DM has prepared for them. It doesn't have to be that, but the DM has to put so much work into preparing monsters, maps, dungeons, etc. Of course, the players could decide not to go to that dungeon that the DM spent so much time on, but then they would be assholes, and the work that the DM did would be wasted. In Blades in the Dark, there's really no such thing as wasted effort as the GM, because you don't prep sessions, at least not in the same way. It's helpful to have studied the book and gotten a good idea about who the major players are in the city, understand the overall vibe, and maybe have a general idea about the lore, but everything else is made up collaboratively along the way. If your players are going to do a heist in Dungeons & Dragons, that's going to be hours of prep for both you and them. You need to decide the layout of the building, set traps, plan encounters. It would be a whole dungeon. If your players decide they're going to do a heist in Blades, then it's already begun. That's because the game doesn't require the players to have the skills and planning capabilities of a hardened sneak thief. The game assumes that the characters have done their due diligence and codifies that skill with a system called flashbacks, which happen during the core gameplay pillar called scores. Scores are the crew going on a daring raid, heist, or adventure. It's like the best of heist movies as a genre, planning included. But you don't do the planning ahead of time. No, this game cuts together like someone is piecing it together in the editing room for dramatic effect. During the game, you can call for a flashback to make it so your character sets something up to help deal with whatever pops up in your way. Maybe a guard suddenly walks in the room. You can't flashback that you beat him up ahead of time, he already walked in. But you can flashback that you bribed him or threatened him into letting you pass a week ago. To resolve this, you mark stress on your character sheet and engage with the game's D6 roll resolution system, where a 6 means you do it, a 4 and 5 means you do it with complications, and a 1 to 3 means failure. There are loads of ways to give your characters bonus die to increase your chances, but most come with, you guessed it, stress. At a certain point, your character will be so filled with anxiety that they'll be on the verge of succumbing to trauma, Blades in the Dark's permanent debuff system. Get too much trauma and your character either dies or is forced to retire. That said, the game doesn't want you to be stingy with stress. It wants you to use it, because you're supposed to be playing a candle that's burning too fast and bright in this dark town. It wants your characters struggling to balance their ambition with their vices. You may want to be the town's next kingpin, but a crippling gambling addiction may keep you at the bottom rung for the long haul. But regardless, your characters are the main characters in this story. However long the story lasts, and however tragically it ends, the story revolves around you. But it doesn't wait for you either. Instead, the game uses a faction system to respond naturally to the actions you take during the game. Within this city, you and your fellow scoundrels must carve out a piece of the city's underbelly for yourselves. But be warned, every bit you take must be wrested out of the hands of somebody else, and they won't be pleased you've taken it from them. You're constantly stealing from Peter to pay Paul in this game, and the consequences hang over you in the form of clocks that the GM will tick ominously forward to represent that the world is moving on. Clocks are a tool that makes the disparate elements of Blades in the Dark truly sing. Whenever you get a 1 to 5 on the dice, the GM has to make something go wrong for the characters, to a greater or lesser degree respectively. If there isn't an obvious story repercussion presenting itself to the GM, they can instead opt to tick a clock, moving some world event closer to fruition. This could be the guard's alert levels, the amount of damage a client is willing to accept during a smash and grab, or the status of a gang war going on in your neighborhood. While clocks are very much tied to the mechanics of this system, I'm incredibly intrigued by them, and find myself using them in my other games, even simply as just an under-the-hood status tracking method so that I can meaningfully respond to my players' actions. It's all of these systems combined that has forever changed my perspective on being a dungeon master. In D&D, the cause and effect of any role is so mechanically predetermined that it can actually feel relatively unimpactful. For instance, what's the narrative consequence of failing a nature, or religion, or really any intelligence check? The DM just withholds some information from the player. In Blades in the Dark, every roll comes with a position that determines the risk and an effect that determines the level of the outcome, and both are set by the GM and negotiated with by the player, who can even opt to spend stress pushing their character harder to improve their position, effect, or even their likelihood to succeed. They can even trade a worse position for greater effect if they want, taking a greater risk for a greater reward. There are no wasted rolls and little wasted time. That's the exact opposite of how I feel playing D&D sometimes. Now, while I imagine a lot of this is ingrained into the mechanics of D&D, I think that I can adjust my philosophy towards calling for skill checks based on what I learned while playing Blades in the Dark. I can get way more creative to making successes great and failures meaningful. For instance, let's say I call for a DC 15 nature check to discern the nature of a curse, and the player fails that roll by 3. That's a nothing happens situation, which kind of sucks. How about instead I say that you can succeed on the check at the cost of the curse sinking into your character? Or call for a flashback where you tell me how your character reaches into a past traumatic event related to the curse to succeed, but now suffers from a temporary mental debuff. I'm going to start playing around with this in my upcoming games this month, and I'll let you know my thoughts on how that went in a later video. Let me know in the comments if you've experimented with something similar as well, because I want to know how it went for you. Now, saying all of that, I know systems don't necessarily mesh one to the other, but I do think there are interesting philosophies you can bring from one game system to another. And as somebody who likes to design game systems, I love to kind of mesh them together, even in other systems like D&D, just to see what the result is, and maybe come up with an idea for my own system in the future. After having played my first session of Blades in the Dark, I am enamored by the system in play here. It's so cleverly evocative, so piercingly focused on what it's trying to do. In fact, it's so focused that I would say it would make this game difficult to run in a setting that isn't the book's prescribed one. But that's where the Forged in the Dark system comes in. It's the system behind Blades in the Dark that's become a popular way to create new games. One of the ones I found that interested me was called A Court of Blades, which is a sort of Musketeer-era court drama with a politics focus. Another was a laser-focused setting called Band of Blades that evokes the Black Company books, and it has the players playing legionaries fleeing a horde of undead. The same company that did that Forged in the Dark game also did another one called Scum and Villainy, which is a Star Wars one, and that sounds very up my alley. If you know me, you know I love Star Wars. But honestly, I've been looking for a way to emulate Game of Thrones in a role-playing game for so long, and Forged in the Dark seems like a near-perfect way to handle it, at least in the court drama side of things. I'm going to keep looking around and searching for a good system to emulate a Game of Thrones style game, but if you know something I don't, please let me know. Thanks so much for watching, and special thanks to my patrons for helping support the content I'm bringing to you. If you're interested in supporting the channel, I have a Patreon that gives you access to a Dungeons & Dragons supplement called the Codex of Contagion that reworks diseases in D&D. If that sounds cool to you, I'd encourage you to check it out. My name is DeHart, and see you at the next score.